Hello, everybody, and welcome to Called Up the Prospects podcast. I'm Chris Peters from FloHockey, joined as always by Cam Robinson of Elite Prospects. And Cam, it's a very special episode. We want to remind everybody we are brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Get snacking, get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. But for the first time, my friend, we have a very special guest. And if we're going to have the first guest on Called Up the Prospects podcast, we're only 27 episodes old. It's got to be a big one. And
gotta be big,
folks, it's a real big one. Yeah, we're pretty pumped today. Really excited to welcome in our first guest. He was the number 2 overall pick in the 1993 NHL draft, won both the Hart and Norris trophies in 1999-2000, won the Stanley Cup in 2007 with the Anaheim Ducks, 2 Olympic gold medals with Canada, 4-time NHL All-Star selection, and was named one of the NHL's 100 greatest players. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time on Called Up, we have Chris Pronger, the Hockey Hall of Famer, with us today. Chris, just want to say welcome to the show. It is great to have you. Hope you are enjoying this summer and the Stanley Cup final that's going on right now.
I am. Outside of Game 3, Games 1 and 2 were excellent. Great for entertainment value. Game 3 was a little lackluster on one side of the aisle, but hopefully Game 4 will get back to the norm.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was thinking about how watching the Oilers lose it last night, it felt like maybe a Chris Pronger was on the other side of the ice, and with the mind games that were being played, I mean, that seemed to be such a hallmark of your career beyond the excellent play on the ice. But as you watch that, thinking about when you're in somebody's kitchen, I think the Panthers are in the Oilers' kitchen right now.
Yeah. To a certain extent, I think it's a combination. Listening to them talk about the referees, talk about the Panthers, what they're getting away with, what the Oilers aren't getting away with. There is a little gamesmanship involved, yes. But I think if you're the Oilers, you got to just turn the page and get back to what works for you. And it's not playing Florida Panthers hockey. It's playing Edmonton Oilers hockey, and they've got to stick to their own identity. I think they've gotten a little off course. They need to right the ship and get back on track.
What do you think when you say you're the Florida Panthers or you're on the other side of that, you've got them, complaining about the refs and talking about what they're getting away with and we're not. How does that make you feel on the other side? Does it be like, just keep needling, just keep pushing that button, get them to play our style?
Oh, absolutely. Do not change anything from Game 3 if you're the Florida Panthers. Very opportunistic, created a lot of great scoring opportunities. Were very physical, outmanned and outgunned them at every turn, won a lot of loose puck battles, won all the board battles. They did a lot of winning in Game 3 if you're the Florida Panthers. And I think you need to do a lot more of that in Games 4, Games 5, and if it gets extended into Game 6 or 7. But as we know, it's a very tight. Games 1 and 2 were very tight, 2 evenly matched teams. I think Game 3, sometimes there are outlier games that occur and happen. And if you're Edmonton, you've got to kind of do the men in black and clear clear everything. But if you're Florida, as you said, you want to keep the hammer down and really keep pushing to your identity, pushing the physical play. You prefer it in between whistles, but if you need to face wash a few guys and see if you can't suck a few guys into penalties, then so be it. But right now, based on Game 3, Edmonton has fallen into Florida's trap and is playing a little bit more of their speed.
Chris, one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on, in addition to, just the timing worked out where the game was crazy last night. But, I think one of the things that we really wanted to talk to you about is this is a year in the NHL draft where one of the top prospects or the top prospect is a defenseman. Matthew Schafer has been the consensus number 1 guy really since the World Juniors, but he's been hurt for most of the year. He's only played 17 total games in the regular season. But with that in mind, you think about it, you obviously were a top prospect as a teenager, and now we've got this one. It seems like it takes a lot for a defenseman to go number 1. And in a year where we have so many great centers, but, the case for taking defenseman number one seems fairly strong considering how big of an impact they can have. With that in mind, if somebody that played to your level can be a difference maker in a huge way. But what are the traits that you think a player that is a number one defenseman or is going to be a number one draft pick as a defenseman need to have in order to succeed in the modern NHL?
Well, they've got to be great skaters first and foremost. You got to have very good hockey sense, which leads to understanding how to defend properly, how to use your stick, how to take away time and space. In being that good of a skater, it affects the transition game. Can you make a good first pass? From a hockey sense perspective, how do you read the forecheck? How do you read oncoming traffic? Are you able to go from option 1, option 2 to option 3 in a matter of seconds as you're reading what the oncoming forecheck looks like, knowing who's going to be taken away, what's going to be open? Those top players, those generational talents, are able to pick that up with a split second and have an understanding of the forechecks that are in place, understanding the teams that they're playing, how they then can bust off and take away different things depending upon how you read and react. And those top players really understand the intricacies of the position. And it just takes a little bit of time to gain experience, get an understanding of, as it relates to the NHL, get an understanding of the tendencies of their opponents, tendencies of teams and coaches and players, and get an understanding of what it's going to take night in, night out to play at a Norris caliber level, that we're seeing out of the Makars and the Quinn Hughes of today's NHL. It took them a little bit of time to understand what it was going to take as well. So, I think as you're building out, a team with respect to the draft, having an opportunity to take a one defenseman, a first defenseman, versus a 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. They don't grow on trees. I think a lot of times players get put into, well, he's our number one defenseman, so therefore he's a number one defenseman. And that's just not the case. On any particular team, you might be their best defenseman. That doesn't mean you're a number one. It might mean you're a number 2. It might mean you're a number 3. It just means that on that team, you play that role because they don't have anybody better.
Yeah.
But, and in that regard, there's so many things that can happen. And players get pushed into different roles. Like I remember Adam Foote, really good number 2, number 3 defenseman with Colorado all those years, gets signed by Columbus and gets positioned as their number 1 defenseman. He's not a power play guy. That's not what he does. He defends hard, he plays physical, and he kills penalties. And he can make a good first pass. But that doesn't mean he's a number 1 defenseman. But he was on their team. And so sometimes people get cast in roles that they're not suited for. And it's not their fault. It's just the roster construction of the team. And maybe they're having to fill a role that is missing in that given organization. So it can be hard to kind of pigeonhole players into certain spots. But, if we go back into recent years, Rasmus Dahlin, first overall, clearly a number 1 defenseman. Owen Power, number 1 overall to Buffalo. The jury's still out on him. He's got a lot of the attributes that you look for, but, there's still a couple things missing in his game that you'd like to see. He hasn't defended as well as somebody of his stature and his mobility and edge work and the way he can skate. And I guess I would say the offensive upside hasn't been there as much, but he is playing underneath the bona fide number 1 in Rasmus Dahlin. So it's hard to find the balance. And I would argue that Buffalo also hasn't done him any favors in who they've partnered for, who they brought in to partner with him and mentor him and help him along the way. So, I think if you're Matthew Schafer and, let's say he goes to the Islanders, who are they going to bring? Are they going to bring in a veteran, or are they going to pair him with Scott Mayfield and Noah Dobson, whomever they have? in their pipeline, or are they going to go out and bring in a veteran that's going to be there to, for lack of a better term, be a babysitter, a mentor, all the rest of the things that Brad McCrimmon did for me in Hartford all those years back, 30 plus years ago. I think it's integral to any young player's development when you bring in a veteran of that stature or caliber, Stanley Cup champion, somebody that's been around a long time, that is able to impart some wisdom, help kind of bring you along, similar to bringing in a Willie Mitchell for Aaron Ekblad in Florida. Somebody that he could rely on, play with him, learn the ropes, bit of a protector, and really kind of help him navigate the first couple of years of his NHL career. And it's important, I think, with how young the league has gotten, that those veterans come in to help really steer the career of those young players, especially early on.
Like, how important is it to not have a young player fall into that trap that they think, I'm an early pick, I have to be a number one right away?
Yeah, I think that's where it's critical. When we look at some of these organizations, clearly there's a reason they're picking first overall. In this case, the Islanders won the lottery, but if you go further down, you got San Jose, you've got Chicago, most recently one picking first, second, third. They're bottom dwellers. Who are they able to bring in to insulate these young players and help grow and develop their careers? I think it's a combination of how they're positioning the player to the fan base. Like when I was brought in, I think the fan base was disappointed. I think the owner was disappointed maybe with what they thought I was going to be capable of doing. I was an all-around defenseman. I wasn't an offensive 100-point guy or 80-point guy. I was going to get you 40 or 50 points. But I was going to defend hard. I was going to play in all facets of the game. And I don't know if I'm sure my contract played a part of it. As I was right on that edge of when contracts were starting to, for rookies, were quite large. Eric Lindros kind of set the table for that, and then Daigle signed a big contract in front of me, and the rest is history as it relates to that. So I think the contract, which now they get what they get, but it's the way the player is positioned. It's how the team manages the fan base, in the sense that set the expectations, set the table for the player as to what's a good year look like for the team, for the player, and walk them through. If you're going to have a young defenseman play at 18, especially a player in Matthew Schafer's position who's coming off a major injury, is not going to be built like a 25-year-old Matthew Schafer is, and get an understanding of giving them protected minutes. They might be able to play more than that, but if you protect their minutes, you're not going to be in a situation where Edmonton was all those years, picking first overall year after year after year, bringing in an 18-year-old, getting them hurt. And, it's a long 82-game grind. And you're playing against men, and you have to understand that there will be moments where the young player looks like they are here. And then there will be other moments where they look like they're here. And that's where sound management and a really good coaching staff can manage not only the players' expectations, but really kind of see where they're at in their maturation process, the development process, so that you're taking care of the player long-term, so that they can be the stalwart on your back end for 15 years.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of good points in there, and really, now with the entry level system being what it is, that you don't have that added, contract kind of pressure, which I think is helpful. But, with where kind of the Islanders are right now, they have pieces. Like they're not a completely, this isn't a start over rebuild kind of situation. How important is that to easing that transition? I mean, they found themselves in a position they weren't expecting to be in. Nobody thought they would be picking one. There is some external pressure from the fan base, just because one of the forwards that's available is a local kid, and that kind of adds a whole dynamic to it. But, just in terms of having some of those key, you mentioned guys like Mayfield and Dobson and others that are going to, he doesn't have to be the guy right away. And the other thing I wanted to ask you with that too is, since he missed so much time this year, is it even the best option for him to go straight into the NHL? I mean, it seems like he did a lot of great things in the short time that he had, but yeah. I mean, this is one that you just can't get right. I mean, from a development standpoint, what do you think is maybe the best thing that the Islanders could do if he ultimately is the number one pick?
Yeah, I think, I think only Matthew Schafer and his team around him, his agent, his parents, can kind of speak to that. But I'm not sure him going back to junior is the best option. Can he go play the NCAA? He can't play in the minors. And that's the bubble position that players of that caliber are. That it might be in his best interest to play a year in the minors, but he's too young, or at least maybe play half of the year to kind of get up to speed after missing a whole year, or going to play college and having a 35, 36 game season, and then really hitting the gym and really working on his body and recovery from the injury, the collarbone, all that stuff, and kind of gauging that position and coming out right after the season. I mean, I think there are a number of options available to him, but I think first and foremost, he would want to play in the NHL. If he's obviously a good skater, he's a talent. With, as you talked about, their defense core, with the players they currently have, I think they could give him the appropriate minutes and opportunity maybe to run the second power play and maybe work his way into the first power play. And, he doesn't need to kill penalties. He doesn't need to be in certain positions early on, and maybe he earns those as the season goes on. But if you put him in a third pairing in a protected minutes and slowly bring him along and not rush him, which you typically would if you're a normal team picking first overall, because they have the depth that they have and the quasi youthfulness on the back end with those players. I think they have a lot more options available than maybe another team would.
Yeah. So Chris, I think with you bring up this new path. I mean, obviously this wasn't a path that was available at your time. It wasn't available last year. But now all of a sudden it is, it is something that you can do. And, what do you think of that? I mean, obviously you followed the OHL path, you followed, kind of go through the traditional path of things. And now there is that hybrid option. I mean, is that ultimately better for development in the end, or is this kind of a wait and see situation?
Yeah, I think it's still pretty early to tell. I think it's going to pose some problems for the CHL in the fact that they're going to lose those high-end top guys that aren't ready for the NHL, but maybe have peaked at the CHL level. And typically those are the guys you're bringing back because you want to win a Memorial Cup and you want to have a winning team and on and on and on. Now those players are going to be going to play college and play at that, and get that experience. Yeah. I think it's great. I think if you're an NHL team, you've now seen these kids play 66 to 72 games plus playoffs. You're now able to then, clearly they're now hitting their development growth phase as far as their body's related. They're done growing this way, and now they can grow this way. And, with a shortened season like college, you get, let's call it 32 games-ish. They're able to really kind of dig into lifting and preparing their bodies for the NHL experience and playing against men. And you're not having to rush them because you think they've grown out of the CHL, but they're not able to play in the minors. And therefore you see players kind of come up and down, go on conditioning stints to the AHL, but they're up with their big team and they might play, 30 games and they're sitting out a lot. And, sometimes that stunts the development of the player and they maybe lose that skill set where they're goal scorers, and now they're not scoring goals. They're playing against harder competition.
Mm-hmm.
You look at playing in junior, the days of a player getting 150, 200 points and dominating, there's something to be said for that, versus a player who gets rushed in the NHL and now they're a checking center, winger, what have you, and they're not able to score goals, and they lose that ability to finish, and they also lose that identity with management and teams, and they're only thought of now as checkers and they only get put in those positions where they came out as 40, 50, 60 goal scorers and had great hands and had a knack for the net, and they just kind of get pigeonholed into those roles. And we see it a lot with players where the players that aren't able to skate and are lacking something, but they had great hands in junior and can score. Those players, I understand the roles that they need to play, but the guys who can skate and the guys who can think the game and play the game at a high level that just don't get the opportunity or are now envisioned in a different role, it can be, I think, frustrating at times, and I think they're often wondering when they're going to get their chance again to do what they really think they can do best. And we see it all the time, and players get made into checkers or what have you because they're great skaters, and because it's easy as it relates to scoring goals. It's much easier to just skate and check than it is to score goals. So I think if a player is able to continue to dominate at each level, moving up at the appropriate moment in time to dominate, and then they come up in the NHL, and that continues that role of playing at that high level and given the opportunity. And then if it's not right for them, then they can move down, whether it be into a checking role or whatever, because clearly they have good hockey sense and they understand what the game's all about.
So it is talking about like the mental side of things too, is that like if you get pigeonholed like that, if you lose your scoring ability, does that mess with you? At what point of your career did the mental side click? That preparation, the training, the focus, and how should teams try to evaluate teams in that regard?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer for defensemen. It takes about 300 games to really understand the nuance of the position, learn the league, learn the players, learn tendencies, and really understand how to play the game at the highest level. There are players, the super talented high-end guys, it doesn't take 300 games. And for the most part, when you're looking at a player developing and kind of what kind of player are they, typically you can look and see somebody's played 300 games. They're done trending towards somewhere and they are now there. I think for me, it was probably my fourth year in the league, my second in St. Louis, where I started really understanding what I needed to do night in, night out, how I needed to prepare, how I needed to play the game, as far as consistency and effort and know-how, night in, night out, to really kind of excel and live up to my potential and kind of alleviate some of the pressure of my position in the draft, my contract, all those things. I think it took some time to find myself and then ultimately, get comfortable in my own skin and get comfortable of, listen, I'm not out here making friends. I'm out here to win. And, if the team doesn't want me to play the power play, then because they want me to be ready to go out against the top line after the power play, then so be it. I was willing to give up, some points along the way because I wanted to win. And I think when your teammates see that and know that, they find a greater respect for you and understand that, we're all sacrificing something for the greater good of winning. And, there's lots of players in the league that have done just that over the years. And, we're seeing that to a certain extent in these Stanley Cup finals.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, it seems it's been fascinating to watch, and obviously, you have all these different guys that play all these different roles. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about too is, that mentality that you had, the way that you played. I mean, is there anybody around right now when you're watching games and you see kind of rhymes to what the way that you played? I mean, it does seem like it is a bit of a lost art, but then we get to the playoffs and the physicality ramps up, the mind games ramp up, all these different things kind of come together. Have you seen anybody among these young players that could, kind of mimic what you were doing? Maybe not at the highest level where we're talking Hall of Fame level, but guys that can do it, and effectively in the NHL.
Yeah, I wouldn't say on defense. I think when you're looking at a lot of these kids coming in, they're all of the, Quinn Hughes, Erik Karlsson, Rasmus Dahlin mode. I mean, he's got a little jam. Rasmus Dahlin's got a little bite to his game. But, as far from a physical, looking to run guys, looking to send a message, clearing the front and then things of that nature. I just don't think these kids, growing up in minor hockey, they don't play that way anymore. And they don't play with that aggression that we did, 30, 40 years ago. So it's just not in them. They don't grow up doing that. So it's just not really in their identity and part of their skill set. Some of the forwards, Sam Bennett and Tom Wilson and some of these guys that run around with reckless abandon, and you see what they mean to their teams and how much they're valued at this time of year. Those are the guys that everybody's talking about. You don't see a lot of people talking about Carter Verhaeghe and Sam Reinhart, and it's Sam Bennett or it's Sasha Barkov. With how he plays the game. Typically it's up the middle. Who's strongest up the middle? Centers, defense, and goalie. As somebody said, the spine of the team, and then everything else is you got to fill in. And I would say Matthew Tkachuk's a little bit of an outlier in the sense that they needed him to come in there and really kind of change their culture and identity with respect to playing that in-your-face style and a little piss and vinegar and stirring it up when things are quiet and calm. He needs to stir it up and drag them into the fight and get everybody awoke so that they understand what's at stake in each game. And I think now you're seeing them. They don't need that as much because they understand how they need to play night in and night out and how they're effective and how they win hockey games and the depth that they have. You look at, I was talking to somebody yesterday about Sam Bennett, his best landing spot is where he's at, just because even if they sign him, let's say 8 or 9 million or whatever he's going to get, 7, 8, 9, whatever they can afford. Even if he played on the third line and Lundell takes the second hole, they got Barkov, Lundell, and Bennett, or they got Barkov, Bennett, Lundell, and then in a few years, Bennett can play in the 3-hole. And he's still going to be in their top 9. He's still going to be an integral part of what they do in their overarching system and identity and how they play. Because their window, just looking at their players, they've obviously got a lot of guys from that 2014 draft. They're 28 years old. Like, they're right in their prime.
Yep.
And so they've got, I would argue they probably got, if they can re-sign Bob for 3 more years, and he stays healthy, they've got at least a 3 or 4 year window, in my opinion, just based on the age of the players, their top guys. They can go out and find another Brad Marchand or what have you along the way. And players, everybody's complaining about the taxes and all the other crap. They want to go there because of who they get to play with and how they play. When they were terrible, Nobody wanted to go. You couldn't get anybody to go there. And
the
there's a reason they go there. Yes,
Yeah.
okay, Florida's great to live. Yes, okay, you save on taxes, great. Okay. But if they sucked, nobody's going there that's worth their salt because they don't want to go lose.
Yeah.
And so
it's pretty
Dallas, the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, it's amazing how the argument has started now. And it's funny. You get the Canadian teams in the Stanley Cup or in the next round, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, but that's the way it goes. Well, Chris, I know we're running short on time, but I did want to ask you one last thing, because we are a draft podcast, and I think one of the most famous things that has ever happened in the draft is Alexandre Daigle, who you mentioned earlier, saying no one remembers number 2. And it's one of my favorite things ever, because I think there's a lot of different things that I find funny about that, not the least of which that the number 2 guy was a Hall of Famer and a Hart Trophy winner and a Stanley Cup champion and whatever else you have. Obviously, everyone remembers number 2. Just what do you remember about that? And you talked about how, changing your mindset and all those other things. But what do you remember about that? And did that light a fire under you, or did you laugh it off?
I did not laugh it off.
Yeah.
I didn't think so.
No.
Yeah.
I didn't hear about it till I think the next day. You got to remember 1993. The articles weren't written till the next day.
Yeah.
So I didn't hear about it till the next day, and I was like, okay, yeah, well, we'll see about that. We'll see. Every single game that I got to play against him, he got reminded very quickly who number 2 was. And, I think for me it was, used as fuel. As I got more comfortable in my career and how I needed to play, etc. That I've got a very large chip right here on my shoulder that that sat prominently for many years, pushing me and making sure that people did remember number 2. But I think as time went on, I wasn't too worried about that statement. I think I'd outgrown it.
Yeah.
But it was, I think good fodder and something that you need in I think in the draft. It can be a little bland at times, and I'd love to see some more comments like that. I think it just creates some rivalries, especially he's allegedly a scoring phenom, and I'm a defenseman, so I'm going to be seeing this guy along the way, and it creates rivalries and creates moments that and matchups for people to look forward to. Maybe not necessarily that one didn't play out maybe the way he thought, but
worked out well for you though. Yeah.
But it was something that I always carried with me, and made sure that in those moments, kind of like Michael Jordan, in those moments where I needed a little edge or I needed to get pissed off, I could always pull that one out of the archives and use it to get me pissed off and ride the bike a little bit harder, or get a meet on and get ready for a game or whatever. And
whatever it takes.
It served its purpose perfectly.
Nice.
Well, I'll say, and I love it. I'm so glad to get your perspective on it. I know you've told it before, but it drives that point home is, it's an inexact science, right? And all of a sudden you never really know exactly how it's going to play out. And so much of it is up to the players to decide what's going to happen. And certainly you made a decision and stuck with it and kept right on rolling. Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough. I mean, honestly, it's so great to spend time with you, to get your perspectives, for also dealing with a couple technical difficulties along the way here. But you have been great insights. We love reading what you have to say on Twitter. It's been great to see you on TV as well. Hopefully we'll see more of that. It's always great to get the perspective of one of the greatest players. So thank you so much for hopping in and being our guest. So
number one,
thanks so much.
Number one. First one. Yeah.
We'll always remember number one. So,
but I'm number one.
Right. Number one. Yeah.
That's right. You had to be number one somewhere. Chris Pronger, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks a lot, Chris. You have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the Stanley Cup Finals.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. So there is Chris Pronger, and he is on his way, as both Cam and I will wrap things up here and getting through some of our technical difficulties, but we are on back and we can hear each other and we can do everything great right here. So Cam, first off, any takeaways from the great Chris Pronger and what we just heard from one of the legends of the game here?
He obviously really loved my questions, which were the most important part of that whole episode, that whole exercise. Yeah, I mean, what a guy, right? He's obviously an intelligent, thoughtful guy who really took the time. He knows a lot about the game. He knows a lot about development. I love the stories he shared. I think he's been excellent on TV too. Like you mentioned, it's like we need him more. We need him more on TV. And just sharing those thoughts, because like you said, one of the greatest players of all time in that position. And, yes, he came up at a different time, but, and I would have loved to ask him this too, is that, he was talking about how we still see some of those forwards that are, going bananas with the physicality and stuff. We got a guy, Brady Martin, this year, right, who is getting a lot of helium up his draft stock because of the way he plays, how he plays physical like that. And that was such a hallmark of Chris's game, and why we're kind of losing that a little bit with defensemen. And I would have loved to ask him about Kayshawn Aitchison, right?
Kayshawn, I know, I was thinking the same thing,
right? That Smash Mouth player. So I'll have to ask him that again at some point here. But no, great insights, great stuff from Chris.
Yeah. So we did get him the number one. And yeah, so Cam, before we get out of here, we did want to talk a little bit about the draft. You and I were both in Buffalo. We were at the NHL Combine. We don't have a ton of time left, but I do want to buzz through. You mentioned Brady Martin. The rise of Brady Martin is nigh.
Mm-hmm.
He has definitely risen up the charts. I think it's much more than just how he played at the World Under-18s, though that definitely helped his stock. It sounds like he interviewed exceptionally well at the Combine as well. Teams came away impressed with the player. I think he's going to have a lot of people very interested in taking him early. The question is how early, and I know you were hearing some buzz out there about how high he could potentially go.
4. He could go as high as 4. I mean, Utah took him out for dinner. Wow. I think he really made a strong impression on them. He is, like you said, he was the belle of the ball, right? He was the darling of the weekend. He was great in front of the camera, from all reports, great in the interview room. And then the play style, it works really in his favor, what we're seeing in the playoffs right now, right? That Sam Bennett is having such an impact. That hard physical hockey is what separates the men from the boys. You can have 95 points in the regular season, but it doesn't mean jack if you go dark in the spring. Right? Where if you put up 60 in the regular, but all of a sudden you're scoring goals every night in the playoffs, that's what really matters, right? So teams are looking at that, and they have just a blueprint of what they want to get. And Brady Martin really fits that. Now, offensively, you're leaving some on the table if you take him that high. And I think teams are aware of that, but they want to get the person, they want to get the work ethic, they want to get the style of play. Now, I will say, someone also put a bug in my ear, and I did report earlier that Utah was listening at number 4, that they got lucky to get that spot, that they would be open to moving it for the right price. And someone did put this in my ear last night to just maybe watch out. Utah knows that there are several teams sitting directly behind them that really like Brady Martin. And so if they want to potentially nudge a team in the direction to pay up for their asking price for number 4, letting them know they're not getting Brady Martin if they don't move up could just do it for them, right? So it could be a game of mirrors as well too.
Yeah, that was one of my initial thoughts there, is that, teams may stand pat if they feel like there's a chance for that player to drop to them. That's all, when you hear the stuff that we're putting out there, or that we're hearing from teams, a lot of it has to do with priming the pump for potential moves, other things of that nature. So I think that's a big one. But Brady Martin, keep an eye on that. Definitely keep an eye on Utah. Fascinating. We said it all along. They were a real wild card in terms of they're close. They're a team that is close. Getting to 4 was such a huge lottery win, the lottery luck that never came their way when they were the Arizona Coyotes. And now, you know, you got the Utah Mammoth with a big opportunity here. So fascinating there. Another guy that I wanted to talk a little bit about quickly, because we mentioned him at the end of the last podcast, and there are some updates there. Mason West, 6'6" and a quarter. A
Not
big
small.
man, 218 pounds. He is not a small guy. He is a star quarterback. There were a number of things that had to get cleared up. One, was he going to commit long-term to hockey? Now, he says yes. You talk to NHL teams, and they said, believe it when I see it. That is the one thing I heard, is that they are not 100% convinced. Mason West, I asked him point blank, if one of the big programs in college football comes along this year, you have an amazing season, everything's going great, will you change your mind? And he said, no, I'm committed to hockey. I'm going to play my senior season of football, because he's a junior in high school. He's got a season left to play football. And then he's going to go to the USHL immediately after football season. So he's basically going to play 75% of the year in the USHL. But only 75% of the year after football's over. There's risk of injury. There's all these other things. The other thing that teams are a little curious about, how much does he really love hockey? That's kind of the other thing that I heard. Because of, and look, he's a really good hockey player. I'm going to put that out. He's a good skater. He's big. He's not super physical yet, but I think that's going to come, and he can score. And he looked great in the USHL. And his play in the USHL is really what convinced him to go with hockey. But I'll tell you what, Cam, if you're sitting there in the late first round and you've got a 6'6" forward with some skill, but you have this thing hanging over, is hockey his primary is it gonna really be what he wants to do? I mean, I have a feeling that the risk factor of him being in the first round may be a little bit too high. Where does that risk factor fall off, if at all, for you? And where are you comfortable taking a player with that?
Yeah, I think it falls off if you are a team who has 2 first-round picks, like Chicago, right? You get your guy at 3, and then all of a sudden at 25, you're like, why not? Why not take a swing on this high upside kid who maybe things don't work out for us for a number of reasons, but you already have your locked in pro that you got early. Or maybe it's just any team at the back half of this first round, because it's like you're looking at the rest of the assets available to you, and it's like, yeah, we can secure ourselves a bottom 6 forward. We can secure ourselves a bottom pair defenseman. But why wouldn't we take a swing? And so I do think that he's still going to be in the realm of that kind of mid, the 25 to 45 range. It's wide open. But yeah, you're right. Is that I also heard that whole, we'll believe it when we see it. And just another football season. Well, maybe he really thrives in football that year. And you're right, and a Big Ten school comes up to him and is like, how about a full ride? How about a full ride? Right now, how much he loves hockey. It's like, I don't want to knock a guy just because he's good at more than one sport. We've seen it, multi-sport athletes, right? It doesn't mean you don't love the sport that you're good at just because you're also excellent at another sport and are considering both as career paths. So I do believe he loves hockey. I do think that he's chosen hockey for a reason, that he thinks he has a better shot long-term to be a career for him. And so, you have to take him at his word at this point, and teams will do their due diligence on him, and someone's going to bite, and it could prove very valuable if things go right.
Yeah, he's also kind of interesting in the Minnesota way, where Minnesota high school hockey, for a lot of those kids, that's their focus. They're like, I want to play in Minnesota high school hockey, and then that's where my primary goal is, and that's where he ultimately wants to be. And then all of a sudden, the thing that struck me was that he didn't realize it was his draft year until the hockey season actually started, because he's a junior in high school, and he's like, oh wait, it's my draft year. And so those, and again, it comes back to that, Minnesota high school kids, they're not always thinking that far ahead. They have their goals, and they're typically localized. And then after that, you wonder. So couple other quick notes just before we get out of here. Will Horkoff was a combine star in terms of the physical testing. He set a record in the horizontal jump, but also one of the pound for pound strongest players that was there. I think just an incredible athlete. His horizontal jump was 6.5 inches further than anyone else in the combine. That doesn't mean he's going to be a better hockey player than everybody, but it does mean that there's a certain level of athleticism that he's at that a lot of others are not. When it comes to those things. I did hear more Horkoff late first buzz. We'll see if that holds. But I think he's another guy that interviewed well, that performed well. Moving to college
measured bigger
to be the right thing. Measured bigger, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So he's a sturdy, over 6'4", trending towards 6'5", plus the weight that he's and muscle that he's put on a lot there. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I thought it was a tough week for Ivan Rabkin. I don't know if you heard the same, but
I sure did.
But I was having a conversation with somebody, and then I just kept hearing it as that it was not a good week for him. Interviews did not go particularly well. Testing was not overly impressive, and this is a guy that came into the season as a potential top 10 pick. Based on what he had done in the MHL, kind of gets pushed out more or less of Russia. It wasn't just, they were very comfortable letting him go to Muskegon. Has a really good season in the USHL, wins a championship with Muskegon. I think I don't even know where to handicap where he's going to go at this point, because there's talent, but he's not a great skater. There's fitness level concerns, and then there's attitude and mentality concerns. So I think that we could be seeing quite a tumble from Ivan Rabkin. Do you think that's what you're hearing as well?
And this is like screenshot this and show it to every kid that has oodles of skill, but maybe doesn't have the drive to get there, and be like, well, here's where you could be, and here's what could happen to you. Because like you said, came in, like some people had him like penciled in as like number 2, number 3 coming into this draft year. Right. And he
big numbers in the MHL. Yeah.
For sure, but like he just quite clearly hasn't taken his training seriously, his preparation, his preparation for the interview process, right? Like there was no faking it. Like the kid has never smiled in his life, as far as I know. And it's just he just didn't have it. And that the attitude concerns, the conditioning concerns, they've followed him around, and they are only louder now. And I know for a fact that there were teams that were like still considering, hey, this player, at what point of the draft do we take a swing on him, despite some of these concerns, that walked away from this weekend in Buffalo just being like, no thanks, not interested, not willing to put a bet on this player figuring it out. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Someone will eventually take him, whether it's Carolina in the 4th or something like that, right? But it's for a player that had such lofty potential, even less than 12 months ago, right? It is not gone well for him.
Yeah, I was thinking about years ago. Nick Ebert, who played for the Windsor Spitfires, was a guy that came into that top 10 pick all day. He ended up being the very last pick in the draft, and then did not reach the NHL. It seems I'm not saying it's a similar thing. It just the two players, like, you get the sense that that Rabkin's going to be on quite a few do not draft lists as things go on. So, yeah. Well, Cam, we had the great guest today. And that was huge props to my co-host here, Cam Robinson, for securing our first guest ever, which is, doesn't get much bigger than a Hockey Hall of Famer and one of the greatest to ever play the game. And also in a year where Matt Schafer is so clearly far and away now. Like, I think coming out of the combine, you can't really even say it's close. There are probably a few teams out there still that would put Misa first, but I don't think there's really anybody that there's still a somewhat of a minority in that regard. Yeah. But to see now you've got this thing, and again, 17 games, there's still risk. It's not without risk. But I think anybody that has spoken to Matthew Schafer comes away incredibly impressed by the person and the player and everything else. So, so you wonder how, if in a redraft, Chris Pronger obviously would have gone first in that old redraft, and what would the NHL have looked like had that happened? And what would his career would have looked like if that had happened? But so many great things. But Cam, tell us what's coming up. We got. It's grind time now. The draft guide is out, but what else do we got coming up on Elite Prospects?
Yeah, released a couple things, final thoughts from the combine, those news and notes, some rumors, lots of rumors were swirling around, right? Last chance for the GMs to be all together there in one space. For myself personally, I've got my rankings coming out, mock draft coming out. We got our 5 bowl predictions that'll come out. We got film rooms cooking right now at EP. We got to get our film rooms rolling out there. David St. Louis making tons of videos too, but you go get that guide, people. We're talking almost 2,000 pages with all the scouting reports, get all those badges, our shades of. You got to go get a subscription. You got to go get that guide.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see where everything goes. Looking forward to getting out to Los Angeles. But before we do that, we got the Calder Cup finals coming up here. And your hometown team, the Abbotsford Canucks, are in it. They are going to play for the Calder Cup for the first time. They will play the Charlotte Checkers, who will be looking to win their second Calder Cup, although the first with the Florida Panthers as their affiliate. This is the first time since 2008 that a AHL affiliate and the NHL parent club, are playing for their respective trophies at the end of the season, with Florida going for the Stanley Cup and Charlotte going for the Calder Cup. That begins on Friday, June 13th. We will have every game for you on FloHockey. We will have that, and you will be able to watch that incredible matchup. Two of the best goalies going, Artur Shilovs versus Kaapo Kähkönen. Shilovs has been an absolute wall in this playoffs. He's been fascinating. It's great news if you're a Vancouver Canucks fan to see the way that he's played this year. But we will have that for you. Huge congratulations to the Trois-Rivières Lions, who won their first ever ECHL Kelly Cup. You can go back and watch that series. They dispatched the Toledo Walleye. Unfortunately, always a bridesmaid, never the bride for Toledo. They fall once again in the final. Very disappointing there. But other than that, man, we got so much stuff going on. Also, if you didn't see the news, QMJHL is coming to FloHockey next season. So we'll have more elite junior hockey. And who knows, there could be even more news on the horizon. But that was a big one right there. Love having the Q. Excited to see what that's going to look like next season. And we will have much more coverage of that as it goes along. But we got a lot of work to do. We're going to have another show next week. We're going to get you ready for the draft. We've got mock drafts and other things coming up. Lots on the horizon. But until then, we're going to take our leave and thank Chris Pronger for joining us. Thanks to Amanda for producing today's show. Thanks to Wonderful Pistachios for sponsoring this episode, as they have the last few months. We appreciate their support, and also appreciate all of you for listening and helping us become one of the top podcasts in hockey in the US and Canada. We have been rising up those charts. Why? Because you guys are leaving your comments, your reviews, all of those things. They help a ton. Please continue to do that. Help this podcast grow, and we will keep it coming for you. Really excited to bring you much, much more NHL draft content. Cam, thanks a lot, pal. Cannot wait to see you again next week as we break down the 2025 NHL draft further. And we once again thank all of you for watching. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Called Up the Prospects podcast. For Cam Robinson, I'm Chris Peters. We'll see you next time.